Welcome to Season 9, Episode 36 of the Ubuntu Podcast. In this episode, we're going to discuss distro death again. We'll also have some command line love. I didn't say that right. And to go over your feedback, I'm Paul, and joining me this week are Alan.
Hello.
Mark.
Hello.
And Martin.
Hello.
So what have we been up to since last time? Mark?
I have been playing a game called Sunless Sea.
What's that then?
This is it's
on
kind
an
of hard to
Arduino?
explain. No, this is I was ill and off work, and I was looking for something to do with my day spent moping
Is that in air
around.
quotes?
So,
I was ill
no,
and
I was
off
properly
work.
ill. Thanks for that. Now I'm going to get fired. And yeah, so I was looking through my Steam library for something to do and just found this game and thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I've been addicted to it ever since. It's basically you're on a steamboat, which is based in a London which has sort of plunged into the depths of the earth and is on the shores of a sea in a cavern. And you have to sail around discovering islands and trading stuff and doing illicit jobs for people. It's kind of like a bit like Elite, but in 2D and with
space.
steamships,
Right.
and not in space. It's really good.
Does it run on Linux?
Yes, of course it does. It's a game, and I'm playing it, so it must run on Linux. But one of the interesting things about it is it's designed. The game is designed for you to fail the first few times, and then you learn about how the game works, and you can pass things on to your subsequent characters, and you've got a better chance the following time. So it's quite cleverly made like that.
And Martin.
I have been reading the entries to our Thing Explainer competition. The many, many entries.
We've had so many entries. It's
yes,
crazy.
a little bit overwhelming. And also, what an interesting set of occupations our listeners have.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating and brilliantly described as well. So that's been making me chuckle endlessly. It's brilliant.
If anyone doesn't know what you're talking about, which episode should they listen to?
They should probably listen to episode 34. So 2 episodes back, where Mark got signed copies of What If and Thing Explainer, and we are giving those away as part of a competition. And what you have to do is listen to episode 34 for the full instructions, but essentially describe your job or your dream job in the 1,000 most common words in the English language. And then email them to competition@ubuntupodcast.org. And many of you have, quite overwhelming, but excellent.
But, please overwhelm us some more.
Yes, so please do. So we're going to put a deadline on this now, right?
Yes.
Yep. So we're going to take our final entries on November the 5th. So the competition's going to go out with a bang on Bonfire Night in the UK. Ha-ha. And we will announce the winner on the show that goes out on November the 10th, I think it is. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Hand wavy.
Yes, around that. So the following week, the week after November the 5th. So for those of you that haven't entered yet, you've got a couple of weeks to go and review the competition entry notes and take part. And please do, because it's a source of much amusement for my evenings.
Right, should we get on with it?
Yeah. So we're going to have another crack at discussing distro death, or perhaps distro fade. The inspiration for this segment came from a Reddit topic that discussed Gentoo's peak in popularity in 2005 and its subsequent fall from grace. So, was anyone using Gentoo in 2005, or perhaps another distribution around that time that they're no longer using or has fallen out of favour?
I actually tried to install Gentoo in 2005 and toasted my parents' computer and moved on to a new distro.
And a new computer.
Same computer, but with a second hard drive, so that I wasn't going to accidentally format the Windows partition again.
Ah, right. That's what you mean by toasted.
Yes.
Yeah, awkward. Did anyone else use Gen 2 back in the day?
No, I didn't.
No, I never did. I know lots of people at the Lug did at the time. And I do remember back then that the Gen 2 wiki was kind of the source of all Linux-related information at the time.
Yeah, it's funny how that kind of thing moves around, how the Gen 2 wiki seemed to be like the font of all knowledge. And some of the people in that Reddit thread ascribe the fall in popularity of Gen 2, at least in part, to the loss of that wiki. There was some data catastrophe that caused them to lose the wiki, and all that information was lost. And then for a while there was people used to use the Ubuntu wiki, and more recently the Arch wiki has been like the go-to wiki of generic Linux instructions and stuff. So I found it kind of interesting that for Gen 2 it wasn't, if you believe this assertion that it was the documentation failing as part of the reason why the distro failed, and the counter argument being, no, we know Gen 2 isn't completely dead, and we know that Chrome OS is built off Gen 2. We know that. But if you take that logical, conclusion is that you don't necessarily have control over the destiny of your distro. There can be events outside of your control. You could have the best archive, the best packaging system in, the Linux world, but something outside your control can cause the death of your distro. And that's a little bit scary.
So you're right, the Gen 2 wiki was held up as one of the reasons why people moved away from Gen 2. But in 2005, there was something else that was happening, and that's that Ubuntu was just coming onto the scene. And although I wasn't moving from Gen 2, I'd spent a lot of time using Crux, which is also a build from source distribution. And I just got to the point where I found that I was spending all of my time compiling packages, installing packages, and tweaking configuration, but I wasn't actually doing anything useful or productive with my Linux installations. And the reason I moved away from those source-based distros was, one, the amount of time and effort it took to get the things up and running, but also I wanted to actually use them to do stuff, and distros like Debian and Ubuntu and Fedora enabled me to do that.
There's nothing inherently wrong with tinkering. Like, where I sometimes go to walk my brother's dogs, there are some guys who have a little miniature railway, and they tinker with the trains. They've constantly got them up on high up rails so they can tinker with the machinery, right? And it's a fun thing to do. They're not actually carting passengers around the majority of the time. They're not carrying cargo. They're not doing something productive in the same way that someone tinkering with a Linux install might be just doing it for their own education.
But I've now got a mental image of you with an engineer's hat on, sitting on a tiny little train and chuffing along at 20 miles an hour.
It has happened. There is photographic proof of this.
Amazing.
But we've got other ways to do that tinkering now. Things like the Raspberry Pi and the single board computers give us a safe space to go away and play and fiddle about, but not compromise the usefulness of our day-to-day machines.
So is what you're saying the reason something like Gen 2 would die would be that Linux in general got easier to use, and so the distros which are easier to use came to prominence?
Well, not even that necessarily, because you could argue that Ubuntu is easier to use than many distros, right? Over the years, that's what it's striven to do, is to be easier to use. Yet still, many people will prefer to use something where you absolutely have to check a wiki every time you update your system, or check a wiki every time you install the system, is the case with Vanilla Arch, just in case something has changed since the last time you updated it. And that's not the kind of person who is using it as a productive tool, but actually and isn't looking for the easiest possible use case. They're looking for something that is interesting to them and challenging and fun to play with, I think, than something that's easy to use.
Has the typical Linux user changed? I mean, there must be a lot more of them than there used to be, and are more of them just looking for an operating system that they can use? Whereas back in 2005, the higher percentage were hobbyists and tinkerers and sort of the old 8-bit micro users looking for a new way of using their computer and just enjoyed doing that.
Perhaps. And perhaps these days, some of those people have moved on to other things. Like I know there's a significant chunk of our Linux user group that we're in who have moved on and either don't really need the Linux user group anymore, and partly either because they've figured out how to get everything working, and if it doesn't work, they know how to find the solution, or they just stopped using Linux completely and they've switched to a Mac.
There's another issue there, isn't it? There's Linux user group fade there as well, because they're not as active as they used to be.
No, some are, especially the social ones, but the ones where they tend to be, getting together and doing Linux Fest type activities, not so much. But what I have seen is interesting is while the lugs are fading, the hacker communities, which are have quite a resurgence and are building quite a lot, they're having Linux user group chapters within the hacker spaces. Yeah. Which
this is one of the reasons why I find the Pi jams so interesting. It is kind of that lug experience now that, well, we say lugs are fading. Our experience in our local area is that lugs are fading, although you hear from around the world that lugs are still going strong in other parts of the world. So it's maybe a geographic thing.
Yeah, sorry.
Go on.
I was going to say the Portsmouth one is still clinging on to the Bring a Box meets and talks, but we do get quite a few pies there. There's a lot of tinkering with pies and so on, probably because they're fairly convenient to carry so long as you don't want to screen with them.
Yeah. So what other things trigger our distro to decline? We've kind of veered off topic a little bit, but no, that's fine. What else caused them to decline in popularity? What other distros have we seen, disappear? Maybe losing their corporate sponsor, like Mandriva, Mandrake, running out of money.
Yep.
Is a tricky one for many distros.
I used to use, I think the first distro that I successfully installed was LibreNet Linux, which I used because it had it had a manual that you could download, and when you don't know anything at all about Linux and you want to understand what the hell the file system's doing, it's quite handy and how to use the shell and stuff like that. And that, I think there were probably a couple of releases after I first installed it, and then that just kind of disappeared. I was never quite clear what happened to it, but it was about the time that Ubuntu was becoming successful, and it had the same kind of goals of being easy to install and easy to use for a novice. And maybe that just got, its lunch eaten by someone better.
Yeah, and I've seen other people back then, like back in the mid to late 2000s, the people lamenting the fact that Ubuntu was giving out CDs. You could go to a website and go to ship it and just order a CD or a box of CDs, and they'd arrive in the post. Yeah, and that was the death knell for some distros who just couldn't get their name out there. They weren't appearing on magazine covers, and the Ubuntu was everywhere, which made it very hard for others to compete. I remember one distro community manager saying it's very hard to compete with a man with his magic box of shiny coins. If you're a tiny little community distro, getting a lot of mindshare when someone else has got a button you can press and send you a free professional CD is hard.
Yeah.
And in that vein, there are distributions that have kind of been created by an individual, and they don't have much of a community around it. And as those individuals behind the distributions lose interest and move on to other things, then the distro sort of fades out with them.
Yeah, and there's been a few of those, and there's been a lot of in the past like 2 or 3 years. There's been a lot of spins of Arch, trying to make Arch easier to use, or even just like tweaking Arch to use a specific desktop and a bunch of applications as defaults. They're not necessarily adding greatly to the world's corpus of Linux distros, but and as a result, anyone can do that, and it's fine for people to do that, of course, but it's very difficult for any of them to get any kind of traction. You've got to have some unique selling point, that whether that be design or performance or security, whatever it might be, you've got to have some unique selling point that sets you aside from the others. And most of these little guys just can't compete.
So you've kind of touched on it a bit there, but how do you sort of quantify the measure of popularity of a distribution? And do distributions have to be popular or successful to sustain?
Well, I think the answer to the second one has to be no, because otherwise we wouldn't have so many distros.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, if someone creates their own little unique distro for a specific device, or has some different wallpaper or different applications, whatever their uniqueness is, if it's only used by 10 people, so what? If they're the one using it, if they're making it for themselves, what does anyone care? If they're looking to use it as an opportunity to learn, then it's probably a great success. If they're looking for a career out of it, then maybe less so. But measuring is harder. You can look for social reach, and you can see who's being mentioned on social networks and who's getting screenshots posted and people making YouTube videos, and you can infer stuff from stats counters on Wikipedia hits and stuff like that. But it's not an exact science. And really, the vast majority of Linux distros are a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a niche, compared with Windows and OS X and Android and iOS.
So it occurred to me recently that distributions don't have to be popular to sustain. You either need two things. One is the finances.
Is this from your experience of Ubuntu Mate? They don't have to be popular.
Kind of, but it's more about the number of restaurants in the town where my dad lives. There are like 2,000 restaurants in what is a relatively small town, and all of these restaurants are sustained by that populace. But not everybody is eating out every night, and not everybody is eating in all of the restaurants all of the time. But there is enough passing trade to sustain those restaurants. And we may have 800 plus distributions listed on DistroWatch and hundreds of others in the wings that haven't been added yet. But I think that there are enough people interested in Linux that those distributions can be sustained by a small, focused audience.
I agree.
So what do we think that it would take to kill Ubuntu?
It's funny you say that. There's been people who've blogged and tweeted about this is the end of Ubuntu when we stopped shipping GIMP on the CD, or this is the end of Ubuntu when we put PitiV on the CD instead of something else. There are certain changes that have been made over the years, and yes, Unity is one of them, Pulse Audio is another, and not doing ship it anymore is another. There's lots of decisions that you could possibly go back to and say that was the beginning of the end. But I'm not sure it would be something as simple as that. I think it's a lot of different things together that would cause it to fail, or Mark completely losing interest and shutting down the company.
Well, that's the thing. If Canonical stopped sponsoring it, do you think the community would have enough momentum to keep it going, or do you think it would just fade away?
I honestly don't, because the amount of infrastructure that's used to build Ubuntu is phenomenal. It's ridiculous. So I think perhaps a smaller version of Ubuntu might continue to exist, but I don't think the current way in which Ubuntu is developed would carry on if the company shut down.
So on that happy note, what you're saying is no distribution is too big to fail.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you're right. I think nothing lasts forever. And I think that, distributions that have been successful and popular in the past, it doesn't mean that they always will continue to be so.
I'd be interested to hear what our listeners feel about distros they used in the past and why those distros died. We may not have covered all of them.
Or why they felt the need to move away from a distribution that they were using.
Yeah. Interesting. Good topic. Thanks, Martin. Now it's time for command line love. And there's actually, I'm cheating here. I'm using 2 command lines.
How dare you?
I know, right?
Is that in the rules?
I made the rules. And so what I want to talk about this time is something that I used. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I've been playing with a Raspberry Pi attached via a USB cable, and that being the only connection to the Pi. I mentioned this 2 weeks ago, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in order to get that to work, you have to kind of fiddle a bit with Network Manager, because when you plug the Pi in, it appears as an Ethernet device, and you have to tell Network Manager that it's a local link Ethernet device, not to try and get DHCP properly, but to do it via the 169, odd, 0conf Avahi style IP addresses. And, I was doing that by clicking on Network Manager and fiddling with the settings, but that's painful. It actually turns out you can do this with the command line. And I already knew there was a command line tool called NMCLI, Network Manager Command Line Interface, NMCLI. And I've only ever used it for just listing the devices to make sure that I can see the devices on the command line. But it actually turns out NMCLI is a super powerful tool. And you can actually do an awful lot with it, like control many of the settings that you see in Network Manager directly from the command line. So you do NMCLI, for example, and then CON to mean connection. And then you could delete a connection. So if there's a rogue connection in your Network Manager, you could do NMCLI con delete and then the name of the connection. And then you could recreate it again, NMCLI con add. And then there's loads of options for setting things like whether it auto connects and what type of protocol it uses, Ethernet or whatever, give it a connection name and which interface it uses and all that kind of stuff. But it's super powerful. And I found the best place for the documentation for NMCLI was on one of the Red Hat documentation sites. It's got loads of examples of how to use NMCLI. And the second one is NMTUI, NM2E. And NM2E is useful if you want to use the cursor keys and enter to navigate around and control Network Manager rather than type lengthy, obscure command lines like I've just explained. NM2E is like a...
Where's that N-curses?
It's like a curses user interface to Network Manager, which is really useful if you want to SSH into a machine and then control the network.
So is it an analog to the GUI version of Network? It is
similar. It shows a list of Right. I mean, you can understand it. I mean, it's like add connection, edit connection, show connections, that kind of stuff, and you just tab and arrow keys around to use it. So NMCLI, NMTUI.
We love getting your feedback, so please send it to us. Even the pointlessly mean stuff makes us laugh. If it's short, tweet us on @Ubuntu Podcast. If it's less short, but please no essays, email us on show@ubuntupodcast.org. If you'd like to discuss some of the things we talk about with other listeners, post on our shiny new subreddit at reddit.com/r/Ubuntu Podcast. Or you can just leave a comment on the relevant show notes on our website, ubuntupodcast.org.
And here is some of your wonderful feedback. Now, we do read it all, but we can't read it all out. So if yours isn't here, we are sorry, but we do get a lot of it. First up this week, Alistair Grant emailed us at show@ubuntupodcast.org.
I think you're still looking for feedback on Raspberry Pi usage. I've got 3. 1, a Pi Model B has an SSH port open to the internet. I've got IPMI tool installed on it so I can check and reboot my main server if for some reason it becomes unresponsive. 2, a Pi 3 and touchscreen for monitoring the front door camera. It can control the entire CCTV security, but that's easier from a PC. And 3, a Pi 3 as a portable Kodi media center while traveling.
Huh.
They're great.
All three of those sound really cool.
Yeah.
Especially like the IPMI thing. To be able to poke a server remotely if it's gone down. That's quite handy. Do you have another one to poke the Pi Model B if that goes down? Who guards the guards?
Peter Jones emailed us.
I use my Pi for downloading shows with Get iPlayer. I can then play this at my leisure through a SMB Windows share on my desktop or via VLC on my Android tablet. I can also stream them to my TV with its built-in Chromecast. Finally, I did tweet Martin in regard to the distro that will not be named to ask if he had considered a cinnamon flavour. I never had a reply. Could you ask him? I don't know why, but to me, Mate just looks ugly and unfinished.
Oh,
See, we even read out the horrible stuff.
So aside from being absolutely crushed by the closing remarks there, yes, I get asked if I will make a cinnamon version of Ubuntu all the time. And no, I won't be embarking on that.
One distro maintenance is enough.
Yeah, one distro is enough, or two now. And cinnamon, you need somebody to take that project on who is intimately familiar with the desktop environment. I'm not involved in cinnamon development, so I'm not the right person to try and debug it and make it work and do all of that stuff. I'm sure somebody out there wants to make a Cinnabon.
You even got a name for it.
Yeah, I have thought about it.
You could have driven a big truck full of tumbleweed through that gap right there.
Joseph Axel emailed us.
I was listening to Season 9, Episode 30 of the Ubuntu Podcast, and you were discussing the use of Raspberry Pi in education and schools. As a primary school teacher from Sydney, Australia, I thought I would add my 2 cents.
I'm so sorry.
I run an after-school computer science club that I call Hack Club. We've recently looked into using the Raspberry Pi to learn simple Python programming. I would love to switch my kids to Linux environment. That's a bit harsh. You're not going to keep your kids for a number of reasons. Mostly because it's a far better environment for learning Python in. Some of the issues I've found with the Pis within schools is the setup and pack-up time involved in using them. As well as that, our Department for Education network runs behind a statewide authenticated proxy environment. Because of this, updating and downloading software on the Pi is a massive hassle, as it requires editing the app.conf configuration. All of this is a huge headache for a teacher and students who just want to learn some programming. That's a brilliant summary of what you've got over there. I've had similar problems with weird esoteric devices on corporate networks and education networks, and it is quite a pain.
Yeah. My advice there is to investigate apt-cacher-ng, so you can use one device as the place where everything proxies through to get your apt updates, and then you can manage all of that proxy messing around in just one spot.
Good idea.
Brian Walton emailed us.
During the intro to Season 9, Episode 32, Mark talks about difficulty he was facing in creating a snap because he wanted to avoid including bash in the snap. This reinforced the concern I had whilst listening to a previous episode's article about snaps. One of the advantages of Nix is its modular approach to solving problems, and an advantage of dynamically linked libraries is the ability to share common files. Snaps seem to encourage or require vastly increased storage and memory, which I feel should generally be avoided. Has this been considered during the development of snaps? It may prove especially problematic for resource-constrained devices. So, just a couple of things about this. I was actually building a click package rather than a snap, which I think there are some similarities in this issue, but I don't know if I'd have had exactly the same issues. Also, I was kind of doing something a bit strange in that what I wanted my app to do was run a shell script, which is why it looked like I would have to include bash, whereas normally you'd probably just be writing a program that does what it does rather than doing what it does through a shell script.
And just to be clear, you didn't need to include bash because I have clicks on the phone that run shell scripts and they don't need bash included in the
Okay. Well, maybe we can have a chat after the show, and you can
Okie doke.
help me work out how to do this.
Interestingly, for snaps, what is interesting that most people don't understand is a snap is a compressed, what are they called? SquashFS file, which does not get unpacked. So while it's at first glance, you might think, well, that's got loads of libraries and stuff inside it. They are all compressed and they never get unpacked. They're unpacked when you read them. And so as they're mounted at boot, you can see the files, but it doesn't unpack all of the stuff that's inside that SquashFS and put it all over the file system. They stay compressed within the SquashFS file. In addition to which, we're doing Delta updates, which we saw a demo of a little while ago. And those will be coming down the line very soon. So you'll actually get potentially smaller updates and smaller footprint on disk with snaps than
and a couple of other features that will help that is there's content sharing interface now. So if you've got a common platform that you need to share between multiple snaps, like for example the GTK runtime or the KDE runtime, KDE have actually done this, then you can create a snap of that common stuff and then have other applications reuse that for the common functionality and assets that they need access to.
Excellent.
Einar Mostad emailed us.
I just noticed that your website looks a bit strange when using HTTPS. All the text is there, but the slick Ubuntu-inspired design is not. Maybe this could be fixed. And I have it on good authority that Martin has fixed it.
Yes, I fixed it today. Thank you for pointing that out. Hadn't considered to test that yet. Should be all good now. Nadri Mashdor left us a comment on our website.
I do see your point on review for a free product. But it also restricts Matthew Garrett's free security privacy audits of IoT devices. He does have a Patreon page for donations, but I fear pricey gadgets will miss opportunity of being flagged as more powerful node of some future DDoS botnet. Yeah, that's a good point. If you aren't able to receive devices for free, you won't be able to do security audits. Yeah, that's a fair comment.
And Carl Cunningham emailed us his command line love, which is now safely deposited in our vault of love.
I did not know we had a vault of love.
Just made it up.
Oh, I'll lend you the keys. Clean up when you're done.
God.
That's all for episode 35. We'll be back next week when we'll have more news, comment and discussion and no line flapping.
Yeah, and
I don't guarantee that.
Martin's got the show notes wrong, so that was the end of episode 36. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, Paul.
We'd love you to come back sometime if that would be okay. We promise not to fluff your lines for you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thanks for helping us out.
No problem.
See you later, guys.
Bye.
Bye. So, anyone else come into the vault of love?